Welcome to the Wake Before the Day podcast with my parents, Clark and Bobby. We're excited to talk about the Bible and the Holy Spirit adventures. Thanks for listening.
Hey, what's up, friends and family? Welcome to the studio. The Wake Before the Day podcast is here. Bobby, Jean, and I are excited to continue our journey through the Gospel according to John, and we're at John chapter 9. And I got to begin with an illustration that we've used before. We used this about a week ago, if you're watching this in order. And that is this story of Joshua Bell. Joshua Bell is a renowned violinist. One of the coolest examples and illustrations given in sermons often comes from him playing his violin in the New York subway with over 1,000, almost 1,100 people passing by and not recognizing the greatness that's right before them.
Right.
He's playing incredible music, and his violin eventually was sold for, I think, like $3.5 million, if I remember. A violin, $3.5 million.
Wow.
People are just walking by him. He just did a concert that night, and tickets were well over $100 to hundreds of dollars. And I think 7 people stopped to listen.
Right.
So the reason why we keep bringing this illustration up is so often God is at work in our midst.
Yeah.
The question is, do we have a sense of awareness to recognize what God is doing? And so in John chapter 9, it's all about eyesight, and there's metaphors and analogies used. So for this story, physical healing equals spiritual healing, and spiritual blindness or physical blindness equals spiritual blindness. So God's addressing everybody's eyesight and who sees God and recognizes what he's doing.
Yep. Let's jump in. This is verse 1. As he went along, he saw a blind man from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" That's a loaded question.
Yes, it is.
Because it speaks to so much of what the Pharisees and everyone's kind of been taught, and it really has lived into up to this point, that if there's something wrong, then you did something, and that's why.
There's some unconfessed sin in your life.
Right.
Something like that.
And so even if you think back and like the story of Job and like what happened there, and like this thinking that now Jesus has come to just totally do away with and help them understand that that's not at all what has happened here. So up until this point, though, Jesus he's turned water into wine.
Yep.
He's redeemed the Samaritan woman at the well. He's healed the official's son, healed a lame man, fed 5,000 people. He's walked on water.
Just a few things, no big deal.
I know, but actually Isaiah talks about how the Messiah will come and he will heal the blind. And so this is even, the healing of the blind specifically is another kind of like fulfilled prophecy that Jesus lives into, that's kind of like mixing the pot even deeper, kind of stirring this up. Anyway, so now what's going on is Jesus is going to get into this deep debate with the parents, with the Pharisees who come to investigate
with the
about
disciples.
Yes, with the disciples.
Neighbors.
Exactly.
Yes, everybody wants to talk and figure out what's going on, and they're asking the wrong sets of questions.
See, that's the thing, is everybody's talking.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking and wants to know, what this guy do? Why was he like this? And Jesus is he's in a whole different playing field.
Yeah.
So in verse 3, he responds, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," Jesus said, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." So you see, Jesus is so clear in this. Again, I feel like there's scriptures that's like, sometimes we in our own spiritual blindness in this text, we just don't receive. And Jesus is speaking plainly and clearly when he says, this happened so that God's going to be glorified.
Yeah.
Not because of the sin of his parents or him. Yeah. And so you see that when you're focused on the wrong question, it's almost as if you can't receive the answer, even though it's like it's coming from truth itself.
Yeah.
The people who are listening just can't receive it because of what's going on.
There's paradigms and preset agendas that are very rigid and not flexible. And so when you do have an encounter with truth, these people are like, no, which you're going to see in just a minute, whether they're afraid of those around them, the parents, or whether it's the religious leaders who have their set of expectations, or it's the neighbors who are like, no, we've seen this guy for forever. It can't be the same kid.
That's the thing, too. It's like we've lived a certain way for, 30 years. Or and my experience tells me that this is how it has to be. So instead of asking questions, what is God up to, like in our own lives, or what is God calling me to in this moment? How is God working? How can I have eyes to see them? Sometimes we kind of measure what God is up to versus what we know in our experience. And then we're going to err on what's familiar to us.
But God says, don't put limitations on me.
Yes.
Don't put me in a box.
Yes.
And so it keeps going. After verse 6, it says, Jesus spit on the ground, made some mud with saliva, put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him,
Yes.
wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. The neighbors, those who had formerly seen the man begging, said, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was. Others said, nah, it only looks like him.
Right.
But he himself insisted, I am the man. How were your eyes opened? He replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes. He told me to go to the pool and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. Where is this man? They asked him. I don't know. So again, the neighbors saw this guy thousands of times. They probably remember the day he was born.
Right.
And saw his family come every day. And what's crazy is they're not even like blown away by the fact that this guy is seeing.
No. Right.
Like wait, trying to analyze.
They're still trying to figure out how this didn't happen.
Exactly.
Like, no, this isn't the right guy. It's another guy. It's not really him.
Like you just said, they're stuck in old paradigms.
Yes.
Which we often can get caught into. This
Yeah.
is my grandpa taught me, my father taught me, and so this is how we do it. And as long as it lines up with Scripture, we trust that God's always making new things. As long as it lines up with the Word, right? And here He's doing something. And so, kind of a response for us to like the neighbor's blindness. We can't limit God in our current circumstances and put boundaries on Him. God, you can do X, Y, and Z, but you can't do 1, 2, 3. God's so much bigger than what we could imagine. And again, it's easy for us to get into routine. And in some sense, routine's a good thing. It's a gift. It keeps us moving forward. It keeps us on the straight. But we also can get apathetic, lethargic, and stuck in our old ways. There's that old line, if you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got.
Yeah.
God's doing new things. So maybe this is a word for you today. But let's keep going. Look at the Pharisees who now investigate the healing.
Okay. Where are we at? This is
Verse 13, I think. Yeah.
They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. They still don't even we're not even going to talk about him seeing.
This guy's seeing.
No, he was blind. And so that's his identity. Okay. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees, big no. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He put mud on my eyes. So again, he's telling the story, the same story. He put mud on my eyes and I washed and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God. He does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a sinner perform such signs? So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, he is a prophet. They still did not believe that he had been blind and had received the sight until they sent for the man's parents.
That's right. So the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious leaders, they are so caught up in preserving this traditional system. They have zero desire to get outside of it and experience anything new. So you had the 10 commandments, then you had the 613 laws on top of that to help you keep the commandments. And what was lost in this is the spirit behind the commandments.
Right.
If you think about any other form of instruction, like we're just talking to our kids, riding bikes in the parking lot, walking home, why is it a rule that a child hold a parent's hand when they cross the street?
Right.
Why? So that they don't get hit by a car.
To be safe.
Yeah, to be safe. It's like the spirit behind the rule is so that you could experience life and life to the full.
Right.
Why we don't let our kids go swimming alone? Because we want them to live, and we want to be there in case they accidentally jump off the diving board and karate chop someone else in the head. It's like, hey, we got to be there to save them. The rules are put in place. Speed limits are put in place. Laws are put in place for usually reasons that allow life to flourish. So when it comes to Sunday worship, or it comes to our routines and habits and spiritual disciplines with God, remember it's all about relationship, and the Holy Spirit, who's working mysteriously, miraculously, is on the move, and we have to be open to getting out of our comfort zone. Can't just stay in old ways. Trust that God's doing something, and He's inviting you to join Him.
That's the difference. I think we've talked about this before too, living with expectations versus living in expectancy. And so that's kind of what you see here. Just, well, we have an expectation. This guy's been blind. So even, I don't know, something wacky happened. He hit his head. He's probably going to see for an hour or two, but it's going to go back. Like
A few wires got crossed, a few screws loose, but they got put back in place. Now I can see for today.
Oh my goodness. Because that's what happens. They don't. So we're not going to, the Pharisees aren't trusting the testimony of the son. So then they say, okay, let's go to the parents because this guy's like kooky dukes.
And the parents are cowards. Let's just call it what it is.
They are. There's essentially what they end up saying here in verses 19 through 23 is like, it's his job to answer for himself. He's of age. Yeah. And so they say, you know, yes, he's our son. Yes, he was born blind, but we don't really know. Yeah. You know, let him speak for himself.
And the reason why is because if they go up against the religious leaders and the power at that time, they could be put out of synagogue, out of the temple,
totally,
and not worship. They'd be ostracized. They would be go hang out with the lepers. You know, that'd be embarrassing, shame-ridden,
right?
And they're afraid. They're afraid of the religious power at the time. And even it's their own kid who they've known for a number of years, decades, that he was blind. Now he can see. They don't have the backbone or the courage to just be honest with what happened.
Yeah.
They don't even have to explain it. It's just like, it's beautiful mystery. But they're like,
I
don't know, ask him. So when it comes to us, kind of learning from the parents here, sometimes it's easier to want to fit in with the crowd and belong to the cultural, let's say we're just talking to Christians here, belong to cultural Christianity.
Right.
Instead of abiding in Jesus. Cultural Christianity, again, gets caught up in traditions and what's popular and what's known or what's cool at the time. And God is not bound by those things.
Right.
He's always doing something. And the truth is, God does stuff that makes people mad constantly.
Yeah.
Being honest, following Jesus, loving people in grace, but also speaking truth sometimes will cause some friction and tension.
Right.
That shouldn't be our worry. Our focus should be on the Lord and what the Lord's doing. And so I think we can learn from the parents.
Right.
In that
Well,
way.
the fear of man, you know, that's a powerful thing. Fear of man. And that's what I think was at work in the parents here, where it's like, again, give us eyes to see, Lord, because right in front of us, we've got these people questioning us and asking us hard questions. And we don't know how to respond.
Yeah.
And really, our response is unto you. Right. Fear of the Lord before
so
fear of man.
The story concludes, and the dude is drugged back in front of religious leaders.
Right.
And it's kind of funny because I think this guy picks up on their, again, rigidity and their lack of willingness to like be open to maybe a healing or a change.
Right.
And so he starts going back to him and like, oh, you're trying to find Jesus? Do you want to be his disciples too? It's almost like he's kind of going, neener. And they're like, hey, you're a child of the devil. You're his foe's disciple. We don't like you. We don't know where you came from, blah, blah, blah. So where the man's parents failed, this guy succeeds.
Right.
He just puts it back on Jesus going, I was blind. Now I see. I don't understand how these things work, but I'm going to enjoy my life now.
Yes.
And he went on happy, worshiping God. And so what's so cool when you go to verse 35 is, again, this blind man was found by Jesus on two occasions, at the beginning of the story and now. Because in verse 35 it says Jesus heard that they had thrown the man out, and then Jesus went and found him. And he asked him, do you believe in the Son of Man? And so the story begins with God initiating it, God doing this work, God sustaining, God following up. And over the course of this story, you see this man progressively encounter God in deeper and deeper ways and come to profess and confess Jesus really is Lord.
Right.
Because if you look at it in verse 11, he calls Jesus a man. In verse 17, he calls him a prophet. In verse 33, he calls him a man from God. And then in verse 38, now, he says, Jesus, you are Lord. I believe in you. And so know that wherever we're at today, we haven't arrived at our final destination.
Yeah.
There's always more of God to be experienced, to be known, to be understood. And that's like John's prayer at the end of John 3, that we would be less, that God, you would be more, that you'd have your way with us.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just a great story about how we don't know what we don't know. So God, help us know those things. Help us see where we have blinders on. Help us, the Psalms speak to that, like search us, Lord, and reveal to our own selves places where we have unbelief, places where we're not seeing things like they should be. And he'll answer that prayer.
Yeah.
He'll answer that prayer for sure.
Did you say the Psalms?
Yeah.
That's a good quote. Yeah, Psalm 139. If you want to look for another passage that kind of backs up, search me and know me, God. see if there's any ways in me that aren't good. So, good quote.
John chapter 9, you guys, really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Man, thanks for joining us on the podcast. It's a joy to be able to go through the written text, this holy scriptures with you, this precious, precious, precious book.
Yep.
Please go through it with your roommates, your kids. Fall asleep to it. It's going to bless you. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with John 10.
All right, adios.
The Lord bless you and keep you. Don't make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give him his peace. Have a great day.